Have you ever wondered why your Cape Cod style house is freezing cold on the second floor in the middle of winter and nice and comfortable on the first floor? Do you have icicles on the front side or the back side or maybe even both? At the same time in the middle of summer, you can't even go to the second floor because it's so hot. Stick around and I'm going to explain to you exactly what's going on in that style of home, how you can fix it, and what the benefits to fixing it are. So a lot of the Cape Cod style houses were built way back in the 50s or 60s or so. They do still build that style of house today, but obviously today we have higher specs, higher standards, and much better products that go into those builds. 60, 80 years ago, however, all they really had was 2 inches of fiberglass in most of those. And also over the course of 80 years, you get multiple different people with plenty of different thoughts of what should be done. And a lot of times when we get there, it's either half done, partially done, or done in full, but it's done incorrectly. So there are different ways to insulate a cape top and it still will work. It really all depends on what your needs are and what you plan on using the space for. Why don't we do this? Why don't we start by cutting a quick model out and I can display this a little bit better for you. Okay, so first, don't fault me for how childish this looks. This is pretty simple. We try to make it as easy and as simple as to understand. So if you were to look at the side of your house on a normal style cape top and you were to cut the end of the building off and look at the structure, this is roughly what you would see on most buildings. So this is displaying your basement with your furnace and your hot water tank down there, your first floor, and then your second floor. When we get to the second floor, you may have little knee wall hatches here, or this may be sealed off completely. Either way, there's a space behind there that's kind of a hot pocket in the middle of summer, collects a lot of heat, as well as up above. So a lot of people tell us, I don't have an attic space. Technically you do. You have an attic up there. You may not be able to get to it, but we would consider that an attic space up there. So up above there, if we were to cut a hole in here, get to it through the gable end vent, there is a space there that we're looking to address. So when we look at a Cape top style house, this really isn't much different than a ranch when we're talking the basement and the first floor. Down in your basement, you have block that comes up to here, and then you have a rim joist above it. Outside ground level is probably right about here, and then you have this little piece of block, and then a piece of siding over the rim joist. Normally, this is addressed from down in the basement, and in most cases, we would recommend spray foaming that with 2 to 3 inches of 2-pound closed cell foam. You can get away with stuffing it with fiberglass if you want to try to do it yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. Usually like an R30 fiberglass would work, or maybe even down to an R15 if need be. When we're looking at the exterior walls, if you need to insulate the exterior walls here, you could use fiberglass if you have the drywall off, or possibly spray foam. If you have drywall on the inside, siding on the outside, it's really not that difficult. If you have a contractor that has the correct equipment, they take a run of siding off halfway up through the wall on the outside, drill about a 3-inch hole in the sheathing. They dense pack it downward with cellulose, dense pack it upward with cellulose, so it's a full solid cavity for the full 8 feet. Put a plug back in the hole, put the siding back on, and you shouldn't really even know he was there when he's done. As long as you find a competent contractor that really does know what he's doing and has the right equipment, you really shouldn't see any settling out of that over the years. Once we get into the cape top section, that's where it gets a little bit different. So again, keep in mind your basement, your furnace is creating heat. That heat is rising upward. We want that heat to rise into the first floor. We want it to rise into the second floor. However, these pockets here and this pocket up here, depending on how you insulate it, depends if you want to allow that heat to exit into that space. So we're going to start on the upper half of the house just to describe exactly what the right way to set this up would be. So your sloped ceilings right here. So if you're on your second floor of your house in the bedroom or maybe a bathroom up there and you have a drywalled slope coming down, really that's going to be a 2x6, 2x8, 2x10, whatever it is, whatever size that rafter of the house is going to be your limitations here. So a lot of times if you don't have drywall in this room on the sloped ceiling, we would normally look at spray foaming that with 4 to 6 inches, depending on what the barrier, what they're looking for, or maybe the homeowner stuffs fiberglass in it themselves. Ideally, if you have drywall in that space already, we would normally dense pack that with cellulose. So the guys would dense pack this as a full solid barrier, allowing no air to travel through there. The flat, there's two ways you can set that up. This is the way that we would normally recommend doing it because it's unusable space the majority of the time. So there's really no reason to heat that space, in which case we would loose fill that base with about anywhere from 14 to 18 inches of cellulose and bring it to that R49 or maybe even an R60 up there. I'm going to show you another way to set that up if you choose, but really this is majority of the time on a retrofit type of residential. That's usually how we set that up. Okay, so this would be an acceptable option also. These sections right here where you have drywalled slopes would stay the same way. Your upper flat, you could get away with not insulating the upper flat, but instead insulating the roof line all the way up to the ridge. In that case, you would also be spray foaming or fiberglassing both end triangles in this area here of the house. Ultimately, what you're doing is now you're allowing the heat transfer from the first floor to the second floor up to the attic space, and we're stopping it before it leaves the roof line. A couple of the main reasons why we see people opt for this is recessed lighting. So when you're putting 6, 8, 10 recessed lights in this upper ceiling here, a lot of times there's not an easy way to get a guy on top of those recessed lights to box them in properly. So if somebody pulls that recessed lights down, even if it's an LED puck, and we were to insulate the flat, a lot of times you see that cellulose come falling with it. In this case here, it's a semi-conditioned attic space, and you really don't have that issue anymore. Okay, so I put the upper back the way we had it originally. The upper flat, majority of the time we end up insulating that flat because it is such a small space, and generally when we're involved, we have drywall in that area. So let's talk about the knee walls. The knee walls can be set up as unconditioned space or semi-conditioned space. Right now, currently, I set these up as unconditioned space. So what we're doing is we're loose filling or dense packing the floor, or if it's open floor joists and you want to lay fiberglass in there, that would be fine as well. The backside of the knee walls, you would normally put fiberglass on the backside of the knee walls or have somebody come through and spray foam those. The key to this is, again, if you have a hatch right here that leads back to the living space, that hatch needs to be weather stripped and foam board and seat nice and tight up against the weather stripping. Ultimately, these are going to get cold in the middle of winter. They're going to get hot in the middle of summer. We want to make sure that that's a full barrier between those two areas. So now what we've done is as that furnace is creating heat, heat's making its way to the first floor, it's making its way to the second floor, and we're not allowing it to go through the first floor ceiling to exit to this space right here. However, what happens is we end up with small hot pocket areas in the middle of summer. So when you think about it, the sun's beating down on this roof line here, ultimately baking the roof shingles. That heat transfers into the space here. Without a proper barrier here, and also where the drywalled slopes are, that heat transfers into that second floor, and that's the reason why it gets so hot on the second floor compared to the first floor. So what we need to do in these spaces, we need to vent that to the exterior. And really what we've found is the easiest, most cost-effective way to vent those spaces is to install 2 gable end vents in each triangle on each end of the home. So we're allowing airflow in and allowing airflow out, reducing the heat temperature, the stacked up heat that's existing inside that space. Okay, so there is another way to vent this project here without using 2 gable end vents on either side of the building. So let's say you didn't want to see the gable end vents, you want to make it kind of hidden. You really can do that unless you plan on filling this with a solid barrier. So you're going to need air travel from one area up to the other, in which case that would involve either fiberglass and baffles in this space here, or I've seen guys take wooden strips and then wooden baffle it and then spray foam against the wooden baffle. But either way, you would need a cold roof option here in order to transfer your heat flow from here to the upper and then ultimately to the exterior. So what we would normally do, let's say somebody had a baffled and fiberglass slope here. We would open up the soffits. We would place a baffle over the top of your insulation, which also is over the top of the top plate of the exterior wall. That baffle is allowing air to travel on the back side of it, entering into the space. Once you have air travel in, it's going to come through on the back side of your fiberglass and baffle here to the upper, in which case we would normally look at a ridge vent on the upper in that case. Or possibly a bunch of roof vents, maybe 4 roof vents down the building, right down there to release the heat. So you have air in, air up, and air out. Okay, so that takes care of the unconditioned project. So that would be unconditioned knee walls, unconditioned upper. You're going to end up with 6 gable end vents on a project like this, unless you have another way of venting the space. So now that we got that all set, let's take a look at a semi-conditioned option. And while I'm setting up for that, check out these puppies. Okay, I'm ready for you. So now let's look at a semi-conditioned space. So now we're going to allow the heat to transfer from the first floor to the second floor and also into those smaller knee wall areas. So if you have knee wall hatches, little doors or spaces, or maybe even drawers built in here, this is really going to be the better way to go if you're going to use it for storage. We would normally spray foam or fiberglass right from your soffit, blocking all the air off, so you have no air travel through there. So top plate directly to the roof line, all the way up to your flat. And in that case, we would normally use, let's say, 4 to 6 inches of 2-pound closed cell foam. The other option in this case is you could use fiberglass, but again, keep in mind you're going to have to use baffles. You're going to have to allow air to travel on the back side of those baffles all the way up this roof line and back up to the upper, and still have ventilation in the upper. This is really the preferred method. It is more expensive to go this route, but it is much nicer because you really don't have to worry about these knee wall hatches closing. You can leave them open, you can leave them off. If you have those drawers that are built into that space, the clothing stays warm. You don't have to worry about boxing them in with foam board around the backside. This is generally the preferred way to go. So does that mean I could do something like this? 100% yes. So if we're going to spray foam this slope with 4 to 6 inches of closed cell, or maybe more if the rafter depth allows that, what we would do is we would block your soffit vents off completely. We would build off the top plate of this wall and connect foam right up to that roof line. Then run that roof line straight up and block off any of the old roof box vents that may be existing. Along with that, any ridge vent, so really any ventilation is being blocked off in full. If there was gable end vents here or here, when we spray foam those outer triangles, those would be blocked off as well. So really what we're doing is we're using the exterior of the building as our full thermal boundary now. What we've created though is a little more square footage for that furnace to keep up with. So as this furnace is heating the first floor and the second floor, now be aware that we're also heating these extra spaces. When the house is 70 and 70 degrees here, it may be 68 or 70 degrees inside all these little pockets now, which does make it nice when you have those built-in drawers or maybe some recessed lighting or a bathroom with some plumbing in the space or possibly some ductwork, because really you don't have to wrap any of those in order to keep them warm anymore. They're kept in a semi-conditioned area. We see this option a lot on new builds, full rehab houses where they're pulling all the drywall and the studs and framing is all exposed, or mostly in additions. Okay, so let's say you're not going to use spray foam and you want to use fiberglass instead. This would also be acceptable with fiberglass. The difference here is you're going to need a cold roof line. So really you need a gap between your fiberglass and your roof decking. So what we end up doing is each one of these rafter bays down the line end up with baffles all the way from your soffits up to your ridge line. So we open up your soffits, air will travel on the back side of that baffle all the way up your slope and ultimately out your ridge vent. This would be acceptable. It's not ideal. You are going to get some snow melting and some heat up there. Fiberglass really isn't the best insulation product, but if you're looking to do it on a budget, this will definitely solve the problem. So most of the time when I get called out to take a look at one of these, usually this is what I find. Over the course of the last 80 years, 5 people tried to insulate it. 5 people had 5 different thoughts. So most of the time they tried to insulate the slope. It's fallen down here. It's missing up here. It landed on the flat. Somebody didn't weather strip and foam board a hatch door, whatever the case might be. Usually this is easily solvable by patching in those other areas, or if somebody wants to do it and bring it up to today's standards, we would normally pull it all down and start over. Okay, so I understand different states have different requirements. Here in the Buffalo, New York area, the R values that they require us to meet are pretty extreme. So you may not need to go that far in a normal climate zone. If you do live nearby, call our office and we can put together a package for what your house is and what your needs are. Or if you're not, definitely check us out at woodmakerproducts.com. If you have questions, put them down in the comments. I'll do the best I can to answer them for you. Sometimes it's tough without seeing the situation, but I'll try to advise you the best I can. Thanks for watching.